Senator Grassley goes down the hall. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, 1st District, Nebraska, comes in, and he's always welcome. We've spoken with Jeff before, and he's in follow-up to Sam's comments on derivatives, kind of had Jeff hit the ground running. Congressman, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Sounds like you've been doing some work already.
Well, we had on the Senate side, we actually had our Nebraska breakfast this morning. Of course, the Sioux Chamber here is here today, but this is a long, long tradition, 68 or so years that we've done this as a delegation. It's pretty rare on Capitol Hill when an entire delegation gets together every week. I'm afraid some of these delegations don't even talk to one another, but that's what we do in Nebraska.
Well, maybe you'd like to start the dialogue this morning on a very complicated issue, but further complicated by an article in the Political website this morning that says Goldman Sachs Political Action Committee dished out nearly $300,000 to lawmakers' campaigns and their PACs in March, with more going to Republicans than Democrat. The Goldman Sachs Group Political Action shelled out $167,500 to Republican candidates and political entities and $123,000 to Democrats. So that seems to be a little out of the frame on this current, but is it meaningful at all with what they're doing with their money, given campaigns? Congressman Jeff Fortenberry with us this morning. Just want to kind of wrap up your thoughts on.
I want to let the congressman talk.
I want to do that.
We want to get the question out. So let me get to
you, Sam.
Go ahead. I think what we're going to get to the question is how do we see this unfolding here? I think what we're seeing in Goldman Sachs is a sea change, and I'd like to get your reaction to that.
Well, first of all, you don't see my name listed in that contribution list.
Don't look at me.
Look, for a year and a half, we've dealt with just absolute trauma in terms of the overall financial situation and the economy. There was a phrase floating around here, well, these entities are too big to fail, and you have to wonder if they were too big to succeed, given the reckless behavior that some of them engaged in, these exotic financial instruments you were talking about, exotic derivatives that carve up investments or detach from their underlying capital values so that it gets confusing as to what their real worth is, and this was part of the decline in the overall economy. This creation of these things, which is pushing paper around and making bets versus contributing to the productive growth of the economy in many ways, not financing anything, but making bets. So the Senate, as you mentioned, is dealing with this in the Ag Committee. The House has already dealt with this. I hope that the Ag Committee on the House side, on which I serve, have a significant role in shaping this outcome as well.
This may be a question I ask too often, but for obvious reasons, I'll put it to you. You're in your third term now?
Yes.
Okay. Compare and contrast what this last year has been since January 1 to this point in time with the other 4 years.
60,000 pieces of mail and correspondence versus 25,000 in an average year. Does that help?
That gives me a snapshot.
Frames it right there, yeah.
That gives me a snapshot.
No, of course, that's due to several factors. The major one being that people are taking an interest, rightfully so, in the direction of their government. There's a lot of agitation all over the place about overspending, overreach. People are deeply concerned. I get very moving, passionate letters, a lot of times handwritten from Nebraskans who want to know what is really happening, why there seems to be so many tensions in the country, and why everything that was considered to be stable before seems to be under great pressure, including the whole concept of having a government that is financially stable. So I think in a certain sense this is healthy. People are re-engaging and coming back to an understanding that this is my government and I have to have responsibility for it. At the same time, it's created a great deal of volatility here and a great deal of adjustment has to take place. It's very hard to handle 60,000 pieces of mail that we try to look at and get back to everyone.
But still, Jeff, there are those bastions of political activity that still, to me, gives the distinct impression there's still a disconnect between Washington and what's going on back in the home district.
Well, you see that reflected in poll numbers. I think the Congress's approval rating actually went up to 18% recently because we were out of town around Easter. Frankly, that saddens me. I think that public service is a noble and honorable pursuit, and when pursued for the reasons of trying to build a more just and good society, it is an extraordinary privilege to be one of 12,000 Americans who have ever served in the House of Representatives. But the way in which political campaigns are run that tear down the institution, certain personal behavior that takes place up here, a government that does not seem to be able to find consensus on the most serious issues for the common good, is leaving people with a great deal of cynicism. It has to be fixed.
One of the things I just had the opportunity last Saturday to take part in a tea party over in South Sioux in Nebraska, and the common theme there was spending, debt, deficit, and responsible government taxation. Those kept recurring over and over and over again. And what is your sense of and you talked about the 60,000 pieces of mail. What's your sense about the impact that the Tea Party movement may have on the midterm elections coming up?
Well, I think you framed the issue correctly. I think that when people, here's a good statistics to put it in perspective. 10 years ago, the government spent about $1.8 trillion. Now it's about $3.8 trillion, at 1.9 to 3.8 trillion. So over the span of 10 years, the size of federal spending has doubled. Now, you and I have a relationship with the federal government in terms of the services it provides, the taxes we pay, and that's probably about the same as it was 10 years ago. But the extraordinary amount of new spending that has occurred, which is leaving a great deal of debt, about a third of every dollar that's spent now is borrowed. What that does is push off the funding of the way in which we're currently living to the children. It's a future obligation, taxation on them, or it's shifting the wealth asset of this country overseas in the foreign debt holders' hands. China is one of the largest debt holders that we have. This complicates national security issues and leaves a real question in terms of our own economic security. Or it's just creating inflation as this debt is potentially monetized, and that hardest hits the people who are on fixed incomes and the poor among us. So this level of indebtedness and government overreach and overspending has really caught the attention of many Americans. But the answer lies in all of Americans being ready to tighten the belt, sacrifice, getting the financial house in order. I've never met anybody that's involved in a program that probably not doing pretty good things, but in Nebraska, as well as I'm sure it works in Iowa, at the local level we have to balance our budgets. At the state level you have to balance the budget. It means you have to make hard decisions about what is a priority today versus what you should do tomorrow or what you should forego today in order to get the priorities done and the level of taxation that you need to pay for that. So I think that, again, this government debt, the overspending, has created this level of concern, and rightfully so, among Americans. It's a national security as well as economic security issue.
I asked Senator Grassley that almost it's the same thing. And I'll phrase it the same way as I did for the senator. Are you hearing more and more about a value-added tax, and does it have legs?
Well, you're hearing more about it in the sense that people are opposed to it, are reacting to it. And so I doubt it. I doubt the consideration of that is coming up here.
I think one of the things that we've touched on here, we started this process of talking about this, and I've talked to everybody we've had in this week here so far, Congressman. I've asked the question about if there's a change, a sea change in the Congress in the midterms, both in the House, perhaps in the Senate. Is the new majority party going to be willing to step up and do some of the structural things that have to be done to really rein in the spending? Because I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Sure.
Government spending being a drag on the economy and not an improvement on it. And I mean, I have some evidence to support that as an economist. But I want to get back to this issue is your caucus, if and when you take the majority in the House, are you going to be willing to step up to these things?
This is a very good question. It's the right question. Are the Republicans ready to lead? Are Republicans ready to govern again with, the plan that will get the financial house in order with a vision that is going to call upon all Americans to belt tighten, to provide a little bit of sacrifice so that we can have a more secure future? This is the ongoing part of the consideration as to what the specific plans are going to be to hit the ground running, should the Republican side be privileged to be entrusted with the responsibility of governing again. There's no easy answer out there. There really isn't. Again, we have a government that can do a lot of good things. It does do a lot of good things. People who are engaged in public service are using their funds to try to help people in a variety of ways. But again, when you are overspending and overreaching in this regard, just hard decisions have to be made as to how you're going to pull that back and restructure taxes so that it's fair and moderate and reasonable.
Well, your colleague from Wisconsin, Paul Ryan, has laid out, I think, a very specific plan on dealing with a lot of this. And I was wondering what your take on his roadmap would be. And I would refer that to all the listeners to look it up. I mean, to look at Paul Ryan's roadmap. And what's your take on that?
Paul is a very skilled public servant. He is the chairman or the minority ranking member on the budget committees, on the Ways and Means Committee. I think he struck out courageously to put at least something out there that begins a discussion. Whether or not that's going to be the specifics, it's unlikely that that'll be the exact specifics, but nonetheless, it sets out what I said earlier, a particular vision as to how we're going to go here, and maybe there'll be a policy debate that shifts some of the things. Again, if you think about where Washington has gone in the last 10 years, and the political blame for this spans both sides of the political aisle, you've doubled the size of federal spending in 10 years. When you have an unemployment rate in Nebraska of generally less than 5%, you have to start looking at why that is. Well, it's a strong ag economy. I assume the unemployment rate's similar in Iowa.
About 7%.
A little bit higher. You might have some areas, particularly in the east, that are more manufacturing dependent, that are harder hit, as I do in my own district. And, of course, the Siouxland area provides great leadership in this regard to ensure there's a diversity of small businesses so that they can provide economic opportunity locally for people. But if you look at those factors, strong ag economy has generally helped us. Livestock's been in a bit of a pinch, but overall that's helped us. Diversity of economic opportunity, particularly our emphasis on small business and agricultural entrepreneurship, plus kind of the character of the way we run things. You didn't see financial institutions in Nebraska engaged in this exotic behavior. Very low foreclosure rates. Not an overdependence on one industry. Again, a diversity of jobs. And then third, again, the kind of the character of who we are. Trying to pay the bills, get up, work hard, take care of the family. That's reflected in the way in which local governments are run, balanced budgets. You have to make the hard decisions. And here in Washington, we're being asked to tax Nebraskans and Iowans to pay for poor governance elsewhere. States and other municipalities who will not make those hard decisions, and that's not right. And so I think it's those factors that Nebraska as well as Iowa can provide leadership for nationally to say this is how we get the fiscal house back in order and reset the economic security for the well-being of all Americans.
8:46 with Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. Any possible votes tonight that would interrupt the state dinner?
Well, healthcare breathed up all the oxygen for about the last year, and so there's somewhat of a political fatigue around here. So I don't think so, but you never know. We'll keep an ear out for those bells that go off and traditionally disrupt our fine dinner.
Well, it was a fire drill last year because the bells did go off and the members had to go cast a vote. So it can happen, I guess. We need to take a break. Jeff, as always, thanks for your time.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
And appreciate it. It's an honor to have our congressmen and representatives in the studios.